Um, I'm going to talk about basically mobile DevOps. I should have put that in the title, but well, I already submitted this one, so it's going to be ALM and your Xamarin app. And I named it the Circle of Life because it's going to being born to being out in the open world. I actually had this funny image with the Lion King, but well, they wanted me to use this title slide, so sorry. Okay, my name is Gerald. Wow, that's big. Okay, I'm from Holland or the Netherlands, or probably you know it as Amsterdam, I don't know. And well, here are some contact details if you want to contact me afterwards, or follow me on Twitter, that kind of stuff. And I work for a consulting company called 4.net, so you can guess what we do probably. And I also have my own little company, basically because I can just put a unicorn on my slide right here. And I'm a Xamarin certified developer, so I should be knowing what I'm talking about. And I'm also a Microsoft MVP, very proud of that. So that's all my resume stuff. If there are any questions, I'm not sure it's gonna work in this this setup. Just raise your hand and I'll try to answer it immediately, or just come afterwards, or reach out to me on any of those contact thingies. Basically, you can also find things on GitHub and whatever. Just use the username up there, and you can find basically anything from unicorn pictures to actual useful code. So. Okay, so we're going to talk about continuous integration and delivery, basically. Who here has already set up an automated pipeline? Okay. With VSTS? Okay, you're not going to learn anything new today. And for apps, who actually has an app in the store? Okay. So there's a couple of people who are going to learn something. Here's what I have for you today. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what DevOps and continuous integration and that kind of stuff is. And I'll show you the elephant again. You probably know it if you've seen some Microsoft presentations, especially by Donovan Brown. He loves to talk about these things. And we'll also have a look at how we can set one up. It's very easy. We're going to do that in the time we're here, so basically 50 minutes, and sooner than that. And we're also going to see the continuous delivery part of it. So continuous integration is one. You check in your code and it all comes together. But then the other thing that's actually the hardest part is getting it out to your users. Of course, I'm going to talk mostly about VSTS and HockeyApp and that kind of stuff, but there's also some alternatives. One actually by Microsoft itself, called Mobile Center. Maybe you've heard of it already. So we're going to have a quick look at that as well. And after that, we're done, and there's another break, I think. So here's the elephant I told you about. This is, I think, in the past year or year and a half, it's been like the thing that Microsoft comes with, and they say, okay, DevOps is something different for everyone. For one, it's a job title, and they say, I do DevOps, or I'm the DevOps manager. And well, what does that mean? They don't actually know. Or for some, DevOps may be the new way of doing Agile or that kind of stuff. There wasn't really a unified definition for DevOps. So that's why they asked Donovan Brown. I don't know if you've seen any presentations by him. He's a great guy and he knows a lot about this stuff. And he created this definition about DevOps. And it took him, I think, 30 days to write this sentence. And it's a smart guy, so it wasn't that, but it's just, he says, I want to be able to defend each word that's in this sentence. So he very precisely chose people and processes and product and not tools, because he thinks products are supportive of the DevOps process and not the tools. So this is basically the definition that is that's stuck. Most people are using this now, and I think it's a pretty accurate one. It's just everything coming together, people working together. Whenever it's in production, the guy that's maintaining it can go over to the developer and say, hey, this doesn't work. The developer then fixes it, rolls it out to production, and people are happy all over the place. Instead of before, when people were putting in a request and waiting for a developer to, I don't know, get in the mood to get some work done and throw it over and wait for the results. We don't want that anymore. I've got a little sample app for this. Actually, you won't very much see the actual app or any code of it. I have been working, it's actually one of the first apps I built, the Bin Pwned app by Troy Hunt. Maybe you know him, the security guy who talks a lot about the breaches and that kind of stuff. The haveibeenpwned.com, you can check your if your data is breached in any hack. You probably all are part of the linkedin.com hack from a couple of years ago. You can enter your email and see if your data was compromised at any point. So he also provides an API, which I built an app around just to get the hang of Xamarin and Xamarin Forms back in the day. And now I'm actually creating a new version with a couple of people, and we're making it open source, and it has these nice features. So why would you want to do DevOps anyway? First, it increases the quality because you get a constant feedback. And that's what's important, right? When you check in code, you want to know if the quality went up or down, and you want it to go up. So that's something that you want to know immediately. And what you can do by that is just very simple, build the code to know if it still compiles and not just it works on my machine. But also you might have unit tests in place that go off and have their results sent back to you. That way it will reduce technical debt because you can easily get rid of it by just removing one piece at a time with every check-in you do. And you can accelerate development and release because, well, you can just build automatically. You can have all these kinds of triggers in place that send your app all the way to the App Store if you wanted to. And because of that, well, you can increase innovation and stay ahead. If you want to build the next Facebook or Twitter and you want to get features out before them, you have to make sure that this is part of your development work. And well, you can, I think it's pretty hard to get ahead of them, but you have a shot. And that way you can improve agility if they make another feature and you can copy it. And then you see this happening with the stories feature mainly. It's in Instagram and now it's in Facebook. Well, they're actually the same company, but they can switch those things very, very quickly. And most importantly, no more failed deployments because you move it from one environment to another and you do that automated. There's no person between it who can make mistakes and do things differently or interpret the checklist that you may have differently. It all works automatically the same way for every environment that you roll it out to. Because unlike what people think, development for mobile is pretty hard. I think it's actually harder than creating some desktop application. There's a couple of challenges. The device fragmentation is one. On iOS, it's pretty okay, but it's also widening. Now with the new iPhone X and iPhone 8 and that kind of stuff, there's a lot of variations going on, but especially on Android, we're going to see that in the next slide. It's crazy. There's all these configuration combinations, and there's a lot of device configurations out there. App complexity, while that's actually what bothers me in my job sometimes. People that do not have any technical skills are like, but it's simple what I want, right? Actually, in the keynote just now, there was the Google example with just one text box and a button. But you don't want to know how complex it is behind that. But someone with no technical skills would say, okay, it's a text box and a button. How hard can it be? And that goes for apps, actually. If you're targeting consumers, they're going to be like, okay, how hard can it be? I just want the app to do this and that. And they expect it to be priced, if they're customers, they expect it to be priced like your nephew is building a website for you. But it's not, it's hard. Fast release cycles, because if you want to add features fast, you have to go add fast release cycles. That's something you can do. Short sessions, the same apps that are used for a very limited amount of time. People are not going to fill in their administration on a app. Some do, but most of them don't. They just check the app and find what they're looking for, and within 10 seconds, boom, it's gone. And people also have high expectations of apps these days. So here's some more. I think this is outdated already, especially because Apple introduced some new models the day before yesterday. But here you can see that there's a lot of device configurations out there. Because you have to do 5 times 20 times 20 times 35 times 6 to have all possible configurations for one device. And on Android, that's just crazy. You have the distinct devices alone are more than, well, I think it's well over 19,000 now. So this is where you want to be at if you were going to develop apps. I've created this very cool schematic overview, very clear, I hope. All the way up there, to your left, that's you, the developer. You're creating your code and making wonderful things, simple. And you check it into Visual Studio Team Services or GitHub, or there's a lot of stuff going on there as well. You can even use some old SVN repositories if you want, I think. When you do commit it, I have to say in Git, I always say check in, but that's old. We don't do that anymore. When you commit it, then hopefully some unit tests will go off, and there's also some great tool called Xamarin Test Cloud, which you can use. More about that in a little bit. And if that's all okay, then you can send it over to HockeyApp to send it out to your test users, which can either be employees at the same company, or yourself, or consumer users. And if they say okay, then you can send it to the actual app store where everyone can download it. And then you have these great users screaming at laptops, I don't know, but because it's apps, but they're happy. So let's zoom in on the continuous integration part. Why do you specifically want continuous integration? Well, I already told you earlier that you want to have feedback as quick as possible, especially when you're working in a team. You want to know if your code plays nice with the code that is produced by the other members of your team, because one could work with feature A and one can work with feature B, and it creates merge conflicts, that kind of stuff. So you want to know if your code still can be combined with each other. And I don't know about you, but I regularly have the problem that I did not check a file into the repository. Well, actually with Git it's less. But the file does not get added to the repository, and then I commit it, and the build will go off and it will tell you, hey, it doesn't work because you forgot this class or this resource or whatever. And that's something, if you work alone and you do that for a while and you have no automatic builds, you will never detect this. And then your computer crashes and you get everything from the repository, and if a class is missing, then you are just missing code. That's something that can't happen. So just for that, if you're working alone, make an automated build to detect that kind of stuff. Running unit tests, I hope you have them, of course. I am guilty myself of not always creating them, so don't feel bad if you don't have them. Microsoft has actually bought, I think, HockeyApp. I don't know if you, for the guys who don't know HockeyApp, it's a service that allows you to distribute apps outside of the regular app stores. For Android, that's not too hard to do. You can just send out an APK file and someone can install it. But for iOS, well, they aren't too happy to allow you to run apps that are not from the actual app store, but they found a way to do it. And Microsoft thought, well, that looks nice, we want to have it, so they bought the company, I think in 2014 now. And later in 2016, they've bought Xamarin as a company as well. So now they have a fully featured pipeline for mobile applications, starting with developing with Xamarin and all the way up to distributing it with HockeyApp, and it's now all going to be combined into Mobile Center. I have to look like I'm doing interesting stuff now to look smart on the pictures. So that's great. And VSTS, for the ones who do not use it yet, you should. You can use it with Git these days, and it does the same as the on-premise TFS you might know. We'll see it in a little bit. And Test Cloud, I already mentioned. And VSTS is awesome, it's free. So Donovan Brown would say if you're paying for private repositories right now, as you would have to for GitHub, then you should move over to VSTS because it's free, but the downside is that VSTS doesn't have any public repositories, so it's one or the other. It does much more than versioning. You can also use it to plan your sprints and make automated build and releases. So it's actually the complete development suite that you want to have, and it's absolutely free for up to 5 users, and if you have some MSDN subscription going on, that you can make that a little bit more. It does everything the on-premise TFS installation does, but it does it sooner, because I think they do releases now like every 3 weeks. So don't be surprised when the interface changes all of a sudden. They will notify you, but things can look very different overnight. They just forgot one thing. They didn't add a Mac. And if you have ever built an iOS application, you might know that you need actual Mac hardware to build it. It's not so much a technical restraint, but Apple just writes it in the license agreement that you need to compile your iOS application on a Mac. So there are solutions for that called Mac in Cloud. They probably have some warehouse somewhere with all these kinds of Mac minis like I have on my desk here, plugged into the network and not doing anything else than building someone else's code and being remote accessible for anyone. Actually, if you're using Mobile Center, they do provide you with a Mac. And you can, if you have a Mac at home, you can just use a build agent. So let's have a look at how all these goodies look like. Whoops. Here I'm already logged into my, let's make this a little bit bigger, Visual Studio account. And here you see all the different projects that I have in here. And actually, let's have a look to have a bit of a challenge. I'm going to link this up to the GitHub repository that I've created for the sample app, the Binpwned app. Wow, the internet is really fast. That's not going to make this a great presentation. Come on. Okay, so here's the repository. It's private right now, so I'm actually paying and losing money and blah blah blah. So there's nothing much going on. You can see that it actually has some automated build setup right here. But let's just create a new project right here in VSTS. You can have unlimited projects and that kind of stuff. There are some limits on the automated build time that you have, but it's like 240 minutes a month. So unless you're doing like gigantic projects, you should get away with it for a while. And let's call this Binpwned as well. The stuff underneath here doesn't really matter because we're just going to use it to build and not to host our code in repositories right here. So when we create this, we have to wait for a little bit. And while we do, let's take, because this is taking a while, let's have a look at the build agent. It actually has a very nice interface here. I can just say, okay, I need a build agent for a Mac because you guys don't supply it. So I've downloaded here already, and if you're not a terminal fan, you're going to have a bad time. So let's go to this folder right here. I'll see if I can make it a little bit bigger somehow. Bigger. Wow, this is awesome. Okay, there we go. So I'm in the build agent folder, and when you start it for the first time, you will be guided through some configuration stuff. You have to enter the account that you want to link it to, of course. But after you've done all that, you can just say run. It detects which tool capabilities are there, and it's connecting to the server, which probably going to take a while because the internet's not great. And then we have our build agent set up. So now I'm using my actual development machine. You could do that, but I wouldn't recommend it because it's going to use the fans a lot because it's doing hard work. So what you probably want to do is buy the cheapest Mac Mini that you can find and run this stuff on dedicated if you're really going to use this. Now back to our project, which has been created in the meantime. There's a lot of stuff you can do, like push or import an existing repository. Of course, they want you to move from GitHub to VSTS, so there are some possibilities to import the complete repository if you want to. We just want to set up a build, and we do that by defining a build definition. And like you are probably used to, let me check here real quickly. Okay. Used to from Microsoft products, you can choose from a whole lot of templates. So you can choose a .NET desktop or ASP.NET, ASP.NET Core, yada yada yada. There's a lot of stuff in here, but also some stuff you wouldn't expect, like Android and containers. Wow. Okay. Node.js. So there's a lot of stuff in here, or you can just start with an empty one and arrange it yourself. Here is the most interesting for Xamarin apps, the Xamarin Android and Xamarin iOS applications. If you've worked with Xamarin Forms before, you will notice that there is no Xamarin Forms template here. That's simply because Xamarin Forms is just a package into your Xamarin Android, Xamarin iOS application. It's nothing more than that. It's just a framework which helps you to write your UI code easier. But down the road, it's still a separate iOS and still a separate Android, still a separate iOS application. So let's go for iOS right now, and I say apply, and I will be presented with the template immediately. And because I'm building a external repository, I will have to tell him, okay, where do I need to get the source code? In this case, it's GitHub. Okay, authorize. It should do that. And now I have a connection to my GitHub repository. And I just have to choose the right one here and which branch I want to build. And well, there are some steps that are crossed out already. They're no longer relevant, or at least not relevant in this case. The Xamarin Component Store, they've built their own kind of component store, which I'm not using in this application, so no need to run this here. But here on the left, you see all the steps that will be taken when a build is commenced. So here you see it will get the sources, then it will, if we would enable this, it will get the Xamarin components in there, and then it will start building the solution. And if that works, then we could send all the results to the Xamarin Test Cloud to have it run there, and copy the artifacts, which is the name for the actual binaries that are produced, and we can do whatever with them. And these steps, there are a lot of them already defined for you. Also here in this list, they're defined in a couple of categories, and it's a very long list. And you can see a variety of things here: MS build, install, Apple provisioning profile, yada yada yada. Extract files. Basically, the rule is, if there's anything you can run on the command line, you can integrate it into your build. And if this is not enough, they also have a marketplace these days, where a lot of developers have already created custom build steps for you. And if you then still can't find it, you can create your custom steps for yourself right here. And you can actually make money with them now, I think. So although most of them will be probably free. Okay, so it says there's a couple of things missing here. One of them, the most important one, is the agent queue. As part of VSTS, I already mentioned you have 240 build minutes, which is just an Azure machine created whenever you start a build. And it will build your code for you, and then it will be deleted, and that's that. You can do that with the hosted agent queue. So basically, you can see it like this. You can have multiple agents working for you, and each of them can have their own capabilities. Like this Mac can produce iOS applications or Mac applications or whatever, but it cannot produce Windows desktop applications. So if I have a queue with just this agent in it, and I want to build a .NET desktop application, it's going to say, no, can't do that. So you have a hosted queue here, which is free to use for the 240 minutes, which can build the most normal .NET project. So ASP.NET, desktop products, whatever, but not the iOS one. And here you have some build on Linux and a hosted Visual Studio 2017 because it uses some kind of new stuff. You can actually find the capabilities of these hosted build agents somewhere on MSDN. But the build agent I have set up will be the one in the default queue. And if we look here, you can see what is inside all these agent queues and see the results of all the builds they have created. I didn't do a right thing here. So if you look here, then you see Gerald, that's my name, and the MacBook, that's my device. So, and by the little green bar on the left, you can see that it's running right now. If you don't have anything in here, this is the thing I wanted to show you earlier. You can just say download agent, and it walks you through how to do that. It's very easy, even if you don't have very thorough Mac, Linux kind of experience. It's pretty okay. So this is all set up, and okay, let's set this to default. Great. The solution to build, I know I have to select these. That's why all the builds failed in the list that you just saw. So let's just select it here. Team API key, that has to do with Xamarin Test Cloud. I'm not going to use it, so I'll just use a dummy value here. And I'm not going to do this either. By the way, on the left you see all the steps, and on the right you can see the configuration that is associated with them. So each step will have its own configuration. Like the build iOS solution, we'll want to know what solution to build, with what configuration, do I need to clean the build folder, and so on. And here, if you want to eventually send your app to the store, you have to use the code signing provisioned by Apple, and for Android you need to use a key store. Notice how I'm not mentioning anything about UWP apps or things like that. Of course, they are supported out of the box with VSTS. They don't need any special capabilities, so they should just work. And who uses UWP anyway? So okay, let's just disable these for now. I'm not going to use them. Save, and I actually, for some reason on iOS, I need to add an extra task, so you can see how that works. Because I have to manually restore the NuGet packages that I use in this project. I'm not sure why that is. It should do that in the builds tab automatically as well, but you know, for demo purposes it's nice. You can see how to add this step. Like that. Okay, and then I can say save and queue. And, oh, not quite there yet. If I want to look good and make this build succeed, I need to do this. And then I can say save and queue. So on top you will see what agent queue will be used. And you see a couple of variables here. you can actually work with variables which are provided here, and you can then say, okay, I want to be able to set this at queue time. But of course, if you use automated builds, then this screen won't even come up. But this way you can have some variable values used in your build steps. And you can even use Azure Key Vault values. I'm not sure if you used it already, but that's the way you want to store your passwords and sensitive information, that kind of stuff, so not everyone can access it. And you can get them over here and make them part of your build as well. And then you have, of course, the triggers. So you can say, okay, this is a continuous integration build. And then it will trigger every time that you make a commit. Or, well, you can configure it a little bit as well. You can say, okay, only do it on this branch, or you can even add specific folders, I think. Although I see it's removed now, but you can. So you can say, okay, I only want to trigger this build whenever a commit is done on this branch. So that way you can easily configure this, and you can also configure it to use on pull requests. So I don't know if you've ever seen it, but whenever you do a pull request or a pull request on GitHub, then there's certain checks that can be required, and one of them is that the build succeeds. And you can actually set it up with VSTS like this. So whenever someone adds a pull request, then a webhook is added into GitHub, and it will start building with the code that's associated with PR. And well, you can that's the first check to say, okay, is this code good enough to even be reviewed, yes or no? So that's something you can do with this as well. And there's a couple of more options, but I see I'm running low on time, so let's just go with this. And I have to make a debug build for it to work right now, because I didn't do any of the certificates configuration, that kind of stuff, so it's going to nag about that if I don't just create a debug build. Now it will start running this build that I've just compiled, and for some reason, well, doesn't matter, this looks interesting as well. It's now going to restore the NuGet packages, like I add the step, and from then it should start building. See, there it is. And this is basically the same output that you would get on your own Visual Studio instance. So right now it's just building, and we should see here running job build. So it's actually sending over the source code to my laptop right now, building it here, and then the result is being sent back to VSTS. Okay, I'm sure you'll believe me when I say this will be successful. So let's just move along quickly. Then we come to the continuous deployment. Whenever you have this set up, then the next following step is to deploy it as well to people that are relevant. Like I said, maybe it's people at your company who want to have a test version, or it's just if you're running a open source project and you want some users to give their feedback, you can send it out to them directly. And again, it's all about getting feedback as soon as possible. But this time you will get it probably from your users, because it's go out to actual people. And it will be visible to your end user and management as well. So if you make small increments and people see changing stuff, especially management is very happy to see those kinds of things. They're like, oh wow, you're actually doing some work. And you're getting earlier benefits because people are falling in love with your app slowly. You can just start simple, there it is again, and you can build everything you want to add over time. You will get you can respond quickly to change, because if, let's go back again to the Twitter, Facebook example, if they suddenly decide to make everything red and you say, okay, well then I have to change colors as well, you can just say, I implement it and have a build set up automatically, and it will be out in the stores in 5 minutes. And this also helps when you want to innovate faster. Setting up continuous deployment doesn't mean that you have to get out every version. When I first started playing with this stuff, I set up continuous integration first, and I was like, cool, it works. And then I set up continuous deployment, and then every commit would result in a new version. But as you're developing, you want to have your commits as small as possible. But you don't want, and that doesn't work well together. So sometimes for a small bug, line of code, whatever, I made a commit which went to master, and then a new beta version would come out. So I would have 20, 30 versions each day, and then I thought to myself, okay, maybe that's a bit much. So you start thinking about how working with branches and only doing a deployment from the master branch and that kind of stuff. But having that said, there's no one way to do this. There's no right way of setting all this up. It's all dependent on how you want to work, how you like to work, and what your requirements are. But this is a very flexible system. You can set up as many integration build definitions. That was what I was looking for. You can set up unlimited build definitions with all kinds of triggers which you want to go off. And the same goes for the deployment stuff. So you can build in some triggers there as well when you do or do not want to have a new version. So what you need, of course you need the app that you're building. Continuous integration is actually a requirement for continuous deployment. Maybe technically it isn't, but what you're going to do, you're going to build the app on your local machine and then go over to VSTS and say, hey, this is the binary that I want to continuous deploy now. No, that doesn't make sense. So I think continuous integration has to be in place before continuous deployment to work. And then you need some service like HockeyApp. I don't actually know if they accept new users, so you probably have to look at Mobile Center for this now. I'll come back to that in a little bit. And if you want to go that far, you have to use the actual App Store, the Play Store for Android, and the Marketplace for Windows. That's where you eventually want your app to land, to go out into the great world. They also have beta programs of their own, but they all have their own features, and you probably, I think they all have an API now, so you can provide them automatically, but they all have to have their own features or missing features when comparing them to others. So it's also for the user, it's nice to use a service like HockeyApp. So there's a unified way of retrieving their apps and getting their feedback back to you. In VSTS, you have the release definitions, which is actually the same as the build definitions. You can also build them with steps and that kind of thing. The only thing they've added is different environments. So you could have one environment, which is your HockeyApp environment. Normally it would be maybe separate VMs or different staging slots in Azure. So you can switch over to my test, my development environment, to my test, to my production. But now the environment is more like HockeyApp and the actual App Store. And it supports the actual same tasks that you've just seen in creating a continuous integration build. And you can set it up to automatically release your app all the way to the App Store. So when you want to test your app, you probably want to do this through HockeyApp. I already told you this. And it helps you not just with distributing the apps to the users, but it also provides you with symbolicated crash reports. So whenever unhandled exception happens, then it will send the details back to you, and you will have the full stack trace for you to examine, instead of your user calling you and saying, it doesn't work. What doesn't work? When I press this button, it doesn't work. Okay. I have a lot of these tiring conversations, and this really helps. You just get to crash even before they call you, and you can say, I've seen it, and I know what's happening. You're going to have a new version by the end of the day. And it's great at collecting actual user feedback as well. They just have this text box and they can say, okay, I like this, but I want this to be green, and send, and it will land in your mailbox. It has support for different target groups, so you can create different groups, which you can also use in your build definitions. So you can say, okay, this build in this definition triggered by this has to go to management, which is probably the most stable version that you want to have right now. But you also want to have maybe a nightly build that is sent to the development group, which know that something can crash and don't start complaining immediately. The biggest advantage of all of this is that you do not have to wait for the review process. Actually, that's not really that relevant anymore, especially with Apple. You had to, it could occur that you had to wait days before your beta test version was through the review process. And you circumvent that with a service like HockeyApp. So let's take another very quick look at how this works, because there's more I want to tell you. My build succeeded, yay. So now we go on to the releases, the release part of all of this. And I think they've rolled out a new editor, which I didn't use very much yet, yeah. So don't laugh at me if I get it wrong. And here you can select another template, which these will actually be different from the integration templates. But here you can deploy to Azure App Services, IIS, all kinds of other stuff. But here you can also start with an empty one. And you can say, okay, artifact. So actually for VSTS, this is an actual requirement to have continuous integration set up already, because you can say, okay, I want to use the build from this project. You can select all the projects here, and I want to use this build definition. So one build definition is linked to one release definition. And now I'd say, okay, well, there's no version available now. That's correct because I didn't upload the artifact. And here you can then say, okay, in this environment, oh, this adds another environment, okay. For this environment, okay, can I switch to the old editor for a minute? You can figure the new editor out for yourself at home. It's a nice practice. Okay, so here you have the environments, and here you can say, okay, this one has to be to HockeyApp. And here you can then, you can see it's the real actual, the same steps that you've seen before, but it only pre-configures to the deploy category, which has all the steps that you could use to deploy to somewhere. And here you can see it has the HockeyApp one. Okay, so we can configure a bunch of stuff here. Which group does it have to go to, etc., etc. And then you could say, okay, when this worked, you can assign users to approve this release, which is actually pretty powerful. So you can include all your development or management or whatever, and you can say, okay, these people need to approve after a deployment has been done to this environment. And then with that, someone without any technical knowledge will receive a version, go through it, and then say, okay, this release is good. Go into the portal and say this release is good, and automatically it will fall through to the next environment that you configure here. And it will go on to the next group without any developer needing to intervene or something like that. So that's actually pretty powerful. And the same concepts are here. You can use variables, triggers for continuous deployment. Or you can say I wanted to schedule, so you can schedule a nightly build or something like that. So there's a lot of options that you can use here. So what are the alternatives? What if you're not really a Microsoft fan? Well, then you're probably not using Xamarin, but okay. There are some alternatives. Not this one if you don't like Microsoft. This is Visual Studio Mobile Center. Let's just switch over to that right now, because I want to show you this. This is where the future is. This is like everything mobile. If you've worked with Xamarin or apps before and with HockeyApp or Test Cloud, I'm not going to get to it. So Test Cloud is the solution Xamarin has created to test your app on actual physical devices. You can take your binary app, send it to the Test Cloud, together with a test script that you wrote in code as well. And it will run this automated UI test on actual physical devices. So no emulators who are doing stuff. It's an actual physical device with the actual limitations that the device has, and you will be provided with all the screenshots, stack traces, little movie clips, I think even these days, of what's going on and what the user would see if they would follow the same pattern. So if we go into one app here, also this includes the functionality of HockeyApp. You can gather analytics from this, the crash reports. You can also create automatic builds with this and also distribute them from here to certain groups and that kind of stuff. So on the background, this is just the rebranding of HockeyApp, Xamarin Test Cloud, and a little bit of VSTS. Although VSTS will not disappear with Mobile Center, because it uses the VSTS build engine on the background. So this is more like a beginner portal. You can easily get started here, get your build, your app build automatically, and then when you feel like, okay, I want to do some more advanced stuff, you can say, I want to go to VSTS now. The build that is set up for you here in the background will be available as a build definition, and you can customize it from there. That's where this is going to. I think it's still in preview technically, but you can use it right now and it works wonderfully. It's very easy to use. A very similar service, which was actually before Mobile Center, is Bitrise, which actually does exactly the same. Oh, it's good to mention, on Mobile Center you do not need your own Mac. It will be provided for you. I see someone cheering there, that's great. So you can just say, okay, I want to build this iOS app, and let me see quickly. Here's also some configuration. It also works nicely together. You can say, okay, I want to test it on a real device. So this uses the test cloud immediately. You don't need to set up any test scripts or whatever. It will just see if the app launches and not crashes immediately, so you know that something is going right at least. And here I don't think you can actually work with build steps and that kind of stuff right here, but it will just work for iOS as well. So they probably have some big load of Mac Minis stashed somewhere for you as well. Bitrise will actually do the same thing, but let you play with the build steps some more. So it's actually VSTS, but actually only the build engine. And it also has some kind of marketplace, so external developers have created all kinds of tasks that you can use. Okay, so Bitrise, anything I missed? I don't think so. And they actually did add a Mac, yay. As an alternative for Test Cloud, you also have Test Ferry, although I think it's not exactly the same. I don't think they run on physical devices, but they use emulators to run your tests. So while it's still useful, it's not always representative for the real life usage. And it lets you do basically the same things. You can use the App Store for testing as well. Already mentioned this. For Android as well, the thing I really hate here is that Android uses the same, it distributes your test versions through the actual Play Store. So it's not really transparent for the user, or actually it is transparent which version they are using. They are not aware that they are using a test version, and it's not easy to switch back to the actual production version that is in the store for the rest of the people. And that's basically it. I have one more thing. I've written a book on all of this. I actually, if you saw my tweet, I brought 3 of them. And what you got from the starting of my session is that I'm a big fan of unicorns, so I was sitting at home thinking, okay, how am I going to give away these books? Do I have to ask some clever question or have people run up to me and the first 3 gets one? And then I thought, no, why won't I let them bring some nice unicorn goodies? So if you saw my tweet and you have something unicorny with you, then now is the time to come over. I have 3 books here. And if they're not 3 unicorns, then I will give one away to, I don't know, someone who says something nice about my session or so. I don't know. So thank you. I hope you learned anything, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.